Hello, we're back and we're going to introduce you to health status codes. As you go along through this video lecture, please be sure and look at the main terms document that I've posted under the resources on Moodle. And again, health status codes are things when we go to a healthcare setting, but we're not necessarily sick. These are things like immunizations, screenings, and what have you. Let's take a look at a very common one for preventative care that we're all familiar with in the last year. That is immunizations. And you can see here the main term, encounter for immunization. Let's have a quick look at that in the code book. And again, you'll note here that all of these main terms, or the majority of them, fall under encounter are the Z codes: neurostimulation, vagus nerve, Z4542, encounter for administrative purpose only, so on and so forth. And there are pages of this. So just like we have on the sheet, one of our go-to main terms is going to be encounter. So this is an encounter for immunization, main term encounter. Once you get there, it's very straightforward to go and find the immunizations. Another main term that we'll take a look at deals with early detection, and that is physicals and screenings. So we can find things under encounter, but another one I like to use is examination or exam or screening. Let's take a look at those. And here we are, starting on or about page 143. We have examination with abnormal findings and so on and so forth, right? And you'll see how it goes on for another page or so, all the way to the bottom of page 143, examination. And again, here on page 292, we see screening, and note all these different types of things: screening for COVID, and so on. That's not to say we can't combine these. Sometimes you'll see people go encounter for screening, so on. But for me and my purposes, if you know what it is, go directly to the main term: exam, screening, right? Because everything ultimately is an encounter. It saves you a little bit of time and a little bit more of a direct path from my perspective anyway. Abnormal findings, right? Again, encounter, exam with abnormal findings, and so on. So pretty straightforward on this type of stuff. Right? Again, genetic susceptibility, another one that we'll take a look at. Somebody is a carrier. Again, these different types of terms you can use. Rather than go through the rest of the slide deck and just read it to you, what I'd like to do instead is to tell you exactly the best way to find these health status codes. Think about the reason why the patient's coming in per the guidelines, right? Encounter. Notice how when we looked at the alphabetic index, there are many, many subterms under encounter. You can trim your searches down by using a more direct approach and using the main term of screening, exam, and so forth. But the hardest thing that students struggle with who are new to this is thinking about, when do you code health status? And the answer is in the guidelines. We code anything that may be a factor in the care and management of the patient. That could be a personal history, personal of, that could be a family history, family of, or other things. As you work your way through these practice exercises and do the review questions, please keep the main terms sheet that I prepared for you handy and go directly to that. That's all I have for this chapter. We'll see you online. Bye now.